Nurses and midwives of Reddit. Have you ever tried to talk new parents out of a baby name? What was it? Story 1. I worked at a registrar for a while, and among the birth certificates I got some of the standouts I saw were Killer, Syphilis and Sweet Prayer Sunrise. This one was a boy. Story 2. My ex-husband didn't think it was fair that girls could be names Grace or Hope etc., and seriously suggested Pestilence, War or Plague for a boy. His choice for a girl was Tangerine. Fortunately we never had any children. Edit spelling. Story 3. Not a nurse, but as a med student a patient wanted to name her child Mudpiles. The nurses silently protested and waited a few days. Mom changed her mind. Story 4. Not in the medical field, but a teacher. There are certain names that each teacher avoids because we've had a student or 7 with that name who were difficult in one way or another. One year, there were 4 Dylans in the same cohort and they were all on wheels. One of the teachers at that grade level had a baby with his wife that spring, and she named the kid Dylan. The rest of us were like, "Didn't you vehemently veto that?" He just shrugged and said it was important to her and he wasn't the superstitious type. Flash forward a few years, I saw a toddler tearing through the salad bar at the grocery store, spilling things, moving spoons from one container to another, reaching in with his hands. It was Dylan. Story 5. In France there used to be a list of names you had to choose from, mostly based on that day's name saint and 3 to 4 others, which is why there were so many Jean, Marc, Louis, Philip, Marie and Valerie, etc. in France. Now it's a free choice. But anyone can ask a judge to cancel a name choice and force the parents to suggest one the judge finds acceptable. So no names like Coca-Cola, Xerox, cocaine, Nutella, fruit, devil, blue murder, plus the rejected name gets added to a banned list to streamline the rejection in the future. And here my mom was talked out of naming me Violet. Sounds like an old lady, they said. Story 6. I once had a student named Linoleum. Some midwife dropped the ball on that one. My brother wanted to name our soon-to-be younger brother Corn Peas and our parents almost went with it because they felt bad about asking for his input and then rejecting it. Fortunately they got over that and passed on the name. Story 7. Back in 2000 to 2004 I worked at a hospital doing admin and an OL battle axe of a senior midwife stomped over with this angry-looking pregnant teenager in tow. Varvara, old battle axe roared. Varvara, open up that internety thing on your computer. Old battle axe did not know computers, but she was well scary, so I agreed, and opened up the internety thing. Show this ridiculous child the first picture that appears when you type in the word Chanterelle. The angry pregnant teenager whined about how it was a pretty name and loads of girls were naming their little girlet, and then went stone dead silent when she saw picture after picture of nasty sulfur yellow mushrooms sprouting out of muddy forest floors. Told you, it's a fungus, old battle axe roared, and stamped off to be terrifying and sensible at other pregnant teenagers, leaving me with the angry one. Turned out that the name she had actually been thinking of was Chardonnay, which is both the name of very expensive wine and the name of a character in a UK soap opera called Footballers' Wives, which was about as classy as it sounds. The baby got that as a middle name later on, which was fine. The first name was Sophie or something along those lines. Story 8. Before I was born, my dad wanted to name my Sky, but he thought that replacing the Y with an I would be cute. Thank God my mom isn't stupid or I may have been named Ski. Story 9. Boss friend named their kid Monster Galileo last name. Nurse tried to talk them out of it, called in child services to talk them out of it. They insisted. Kid goes by Galileo. Honestly, I kind of like the sound of it for an adult or a performer's name, but GUH, being a kid named Monster has to be rough in school. Story 10. I work in a music store that offers lessons and rents instruments. We have a list of the oddest child names. January, Quest, Sixt, Shebra, Battle, Cheyenne are just a few on there. The best one was Olivia, pronounced Olivia. When speaking with the grandmother she said that the mom wanted to name her Olivia but the father hated the name. Dad saw a bottle of Olive on the counter, so he and the mother compromised and came up with Olivia. Story 11. I had a coworker named Trina. When she was pregnant, she told me that she and her husband had decided to name the baby Latrine. I had to explain to her that she was naming her poor baby after the hole in the ground that soldiers into. She was horrified, and changed it to Katrina. 2 days after the kid was born, Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. Story 12. My boyfriend's grandmother wanted to name her daughter Sunshine. The midwife said that wasn't allowed because it wasn't a real name and his grandmother had no other backup baby names. So, a few minutes later when she heard someone down the hall screaming Tina, she named her daughter Tina because she couldn't think of anything else on the spot. Story 13. I wanted to name my daughter Daisy. It's always been my favorite. Even my husband loved the idea. My whole family said it was a dog's name and they wouldn't let it go, so I didn't name her Daisy. Story 14. My mother, who has an odd, to say the least, sense of humor, wanted to name my baby brother Ichabod Rusty. Our surname is Ford. She was determined to call him Itchy Rusty Ford. Tickled herself shitless through the pregnancy. And look, it was funny. I mean, I was 12, but everyone thought she was just being her usual goofy self. Apparently, she got attached to it, and at some point Dad just said no, we are not naming the baby that. They settled on something much more appropriate. Although, these days I think the little might have been better named Itchy Rusty LMFAO. Story 15. Not a nurse, but my mom had to talk my dad out of wanting to name me Prudence. I wouldn't have minded being called Prudence, but that's just me. Now I have an even weirder name that nobody knows how to pronounce because of a popular TV show. Story 16. Working as an ERT on overnights. I got called to OB to help out a lot. One name will always stick with me because of how unfortunate it is for the kid and how ridiculous it all is. The mom was deep in meth and other substance abuse, and she told us she wanted him named Zion. We were like, oh cool, no problem, so we asked her to fill out the paperwork of everything for us to submit and put in the chart, and she wrote down Zion. She looked us dead in the eyes and said, the V is silent. She also gave him 5 middle names because she didn't know which one was the father, so he got him all. Story 17. My dad loved Stevie Nicks and wanted to name all of us Rhiannon, but my mom wouldn't let him. So my oldest sister's name ended up being Stevie Nicole, but now people always assume she's a guy when they see the name Stevie. Story 18. My ex wanted to name my son Jaeger, pronounced either Jagger or Jaeger or Schottinger. That was a no. Everyone talked me out of naming my daughter Evelyn and nickname Evie. It's a family name, but apparently it's for old women only. LOL. Story 19 again, not quite what was being asked, but a friend of mine was almost called Apollo. To be fair, he was born on the day of the first moon landing in 1969, and his dad is Greek. His mom put her foot down though, and he ended up Alexander, which is still a good Greek name, okay, technically Macedonian, but the Greeks claim him too. Story 20. My mum and dad were talked out of calling my sister Florence after my mum's grandmother. The midwife said you can't call such a beautiful baby that, so they didn't. Story 21. My piece of narcissistic father wanted to name me Phoenix, you know, because I was a new version of him rising from the ashes of his or something, I don't know. Thank God my mom vetoed it and I ended up with a pretty normal name. Edit. I should clarify that I don't think Phoenix is a bad name outright, just my father's mindset and reasoning. Story 22. My brother talked my mother out of naming me Mulan, because he had a major crush on her and didn't think a sack of potatoes deserved to be given her name. Story 23. My dad legit told my mum that my sister was to be either Jackie and after his EX, or Lisa Marie after Elvis' daughter. I'm amazed I was made after that. My sis is Lisa Il. Story 24. Obligatory, not a nurse or midwife. Took a call at the call center once and this poor frazzled EMT told me that she was delivering a kid and the mom's bowels voided, which is normal and apparently that's called meconium. She told her partner, "Oop, we got some meconium here," and the mom yells, "Oh my god, that's such a beautiful name. You just named my baby." The caller said, "Paul, I tried to tell her, but there's a kid running around named Birth and I just don't know how to handle being responsible for that." Edit. Apparently I'm supposed to do empirical research before relating a story that I was told by the person who claimed to have lived it. So let me be explicitly clear. This story was related to me over the phone by the person who claimed to have lived it, as I booked her a hotel room. I am not a nurse or midwife, and here I am Petai Aravude Nambi Kalaya Perumal. Story 25. My best friend is a midwife and she had a mother who wanted to name her girl Ashnashini Ashoni. Thankfully, she changed her mind after a few days. Story 26. My coworker went to school with a girl named Fallopia. I feel sorry for her, especially when she takes biology classes and they talk about fallopian tubes. Story 27. I am neither a nurse or midwife, but I once was paid to design birthday cards for a kid named Mileage, pronounced my liege, like you would refer to a king. Both the pronunciation and the spelling made me question why I deal with this customer base. Story 28. I know a teacher who has an elementary age student with an African name that unfortunately does not translate well into English North America. The kid's name is a cockring, and yes, I wish I was kidding. Edit for grammar. Story 29. I used to work in labor and delivery. One of the very experienced nurses had 2 times she had to talk people out of naming their child vagina, and explain why they were hearing that word they liked so much. Story 30. I was almost named Thaddeus, but am waiting to read the comments from 1. The person who had to watch that baby get named ABCD, which I believe is pronounced Absidy. 2. The person who had to watch Kanye name his daughter North. Story 31. As a family medicine resident, I personally delivered 2 different girls named Khaleesi. This was around 2016, well before season 8. I imagine there might be some buyer's remorse on the parents' part at this point. Story 32. Ladies and gentlemen, Adolf Hitler. The parents then tried to claim they weren't Nazis, at first. Story 33. My dad wanted to name me Snvit, the Swedish name for Snow White, but in the end my parents named me something else. Had my younger brother been a girl, had been named Trunrosa, meaning thorn rose, and is the Swedish name on Sleeping Beauty. Never did get to the bottom what my dad's obsession with princesses was all about. Story 34. My mom is a public school librarian, and the cringiest name she has encountered so far is a girl named Lesme, pronounced like Leslie, but with an M. Edit. I also have an acquaintance with the last name Forrest whose father was eventually talked out of naming her Rain. Story 35. My dad is the 3rd, and I would have been the 4th if I was born a dude. He still wanted to name me Roberta Edwina, his female version. Yikes ol. Story 36. Oh, I got one. Goth parents 18ish had a baby. They wanted to name this sweet baby girl Death. I could not stand for it, so I told them every time I went to type it into birth certificate it changed the form to a death certificate. They bought, and that girl is now named Morticia. Story 37. My daughter named my grandchildren Draven Tyrion Dexter Zaraphil Johnson, and Andromeda Nymphadora Jane Zaraphil Johnson. I'm not happy, but at least we convinced her to leave Lucifer out. Story 38. My sister's initials were almost PMS. They swapped the first and middle names Edito, and my brother's is MRS. It makes for a lovely bar mitzvah shirt. Story 39. My mother's name. My grandmother wanted to name her Ishbel and my grandfather wanted to name her Laura, so they got a baby name book and the first name they agreed on would be her name. Her name is Wanda. Story 40. When I traveled around Africa, there were people named for qualities the parents wanted for the kid. So met happiness, joy, loveness, good luck very common, leadership, sunshine, my favorite shoes. Story 41. I was young and stupid in the 80s when my daughter was born. I really wanted to name her Frisbee, because I was just certain that Frisbee last name was going to be the coolest girl in school. Nothing ever came of my bad idea. My daughter's name is Jennifer. Story 42. The first baby I ever caught. Upon seeing her, I got a very strong feeling that her name was Esther, but I didn't say anything. I asked the mother what she was going to name her, and she said well I had ideas before, but a new name just came to me. I asked her what the name was, and she said I'm worried it's too old-fashioned, like a grandma name, and I was like well what is it, and I was thinking she looks like an Esther. Story 43. Not a nurse, but I was the kid in the situation. My dad wanted to name me a swear word just for the joke. Apparently that's illegal. I would have been fine with it BTW. Story 44. There was a kid in my son's daycare toddler age whose name was Epic. I feel so badly for this child. I think the parents must have thought that you could just impose positive character traits to their son by applying this unique name. Can you imagine trying to go through life and constantly either try to live up to your namesake or have to live up to other people's standards of what that designation means? They are setting up their child for a life full of teasing, regret, low self-esteem and diminished self-worth. You could never just be average or comfortably mundane with that moniker. Anything less than stellar at everything would feel like failure. I also knew a woman who when we were teens got pregnant and decided to name her daughter Fenetra. She thought it sounded pretty and unique. She didn't realize that it was the French word for window. Story 45. The best thing about Sweden is that the tax authority is in charge of approving names. The rule of thumb is that if a proposed name is stupid it gets rejected. Story 46. Not a nurse or midwife, but the one name that has stood out for me was an Amber Alert in my city. The little girl's name was Amelia, or at least that is how it was spelled on the Amber Alert. Story 47. So, this wasn't me, but my dad's friend. I can't remember when, but I remember him telling me about his friend who worked as a nurse. She asked the couple what they had named the baby, and the woman had said Penise, but the way she spelled it was Nice. So the nurse, trying to be polite, told her that the name was inappropriate and was spelled penis. But the woman kept insisting that it was Penise and not Nice. No clue how it turned out, but if the name stayed, I feel bad for that child. Story 48. When I was in basic training back in the early 2000s, there was a guy whose last name was Starcruiser. Found out from one of his division mates that his full name was Mercury's son Starcruiser, and that his dad had apparently was a massive Star Wars geek after seeing the original way back in the 70s, that he legally changed his last name to Starcruiser. This guy was not in my division, but was in one of the ones that was housed in the same building my division was in, so I had seen him a few times. Turns out he was also married, and she was there in a different division at the time. Story 49. I'm not a midwife, however. My grandma's brother, my great-uncle, was named Lord because his parents wanted the white men to have to call a Native American Lord. Story 50. I used to work with youth who needed mental health support. I worked with two girls who had the following first names: Nausea, pronounced like nausea, Cinnamon. I felt terrible for them. Story 51. I once had an Asian coworker who had taken up Lucifer as their westernized first name. I remember having a laughing fit when I first found out, then regretted it just in case. Story 52. Actual former OB nurse here. The boring real answer is we can't tell you the names because of HIPAA, especially because the unique ones are the ones that could be used to personally identify someone. But yes, there have been plenty of ridiculous names. I personally never tried to talk anyone out of them, but I definitely perfected my poker face and my "oh cute" response over the years. Story 53. As an aside, sorry. Can people please stop taking regular names and then just think that they're clever by changing the spelling? Jason becomes Jason, for life. People will know that he has dumb pretentious parents and he'll always have to spell his name when he's on the phone and the other person is writing his name down. Hassle. Story 54. In my culture, grandfathers of your father's side were given the right to name you, so he named me, the youngest son, after him, Edward, standard name though. He told everyone that I was now Edward and everybody flipped out on my grandpa for giving me such an old-fashioned name. I'm Asian, so you know their perceptions on Western things and names might be kinda funny. Nobody decided to change my name though. Why they just let it through, but my parents just started calling me Jason since I was a kid, since they thought it would be weird to have two Edwards in the family. Now I just introduce myself as Jason. But now I feel like I'll just go by Edward so I can stop explaining why I go by Jason. Story 55. My teacher colleague was at the hospital with a newborn. In the bed next to them was a Greek woman and her family. The oldest man in this family proudly and loudly said that the newborn girl should be named Fithra. The problem is this was in Sweden, and the old man had clearly missed that he just named the girl Pussy War. Story 56. I know a couple whose baby name was rejected by the government of Canada. They wanted to name their son the Reverend. They were told they can't name the baby with a title. Story 57. So this is what my mother told me. At first she tried to name me Belle, her favorite Disney princess, and my dad wanted to name me Misty, then it was Misty Belle, then it was Belle Jubilee, then they decided on my name with a compromise of Belle as my middle name. It was right after they decided that the girl who was sharing a room with my mum, I was born with the orange skin thing, so they had me and her stay for a while, wrote down my entire name, including my dad's last name, for her baby and rewrote to make it fancy, mind you. She only heard the name so she didn't know how to spell my last name, but this is what she came up with. Sabrinu Billy Rolsh. My mom found out, and looked at her like she was nuts. Got into a mini fight because my mom said that was stupid, and the girl said if you call that name stupid then you've done your baby for life with a stupid name. I guess she was trying to show my mom my name was stupid. Luckily her other half stepped in and signed the certificate with Lucy and instead. Like who TF takes the entire name of someone else baby, including last name, and try to use it for their baby. Story 58. Wife is a midwife. She told me of one young lass she had and who insisted her newborn be called Oshan. She asked for spelling and everything. Now, the young lass wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, nor the most well-to-do, but nevertheless the name seemed decent enough. Wife thought it might be a family name or something. When asked where it came from, the young lady replied, "What? It's not from anything, it's Oshan, just like the sea ocean." Yeah, what I said, Oshan. Story 59. While I am neither a nurse or midwife, I can confirm that my mum wanted to call me Christabel, while my dad wanted to call me Devonshire as in the English county. How the I ended up as Sarah, one of the dullest names known to mankind, is a mystery. I am presuming a kind and sensible nurse stepped in to save me. I did however accidentally tell my school friends my almost name was Derbyshire, and was then called Darby for years, to the extent that when we were collectively nicked for shoplifting none of the other parents knew my real name. So when we were all at the police station and I was called in for my bullocking, all the parents were saying to my parents her name is Sarah. We thought it was Darby. Did stop them calling me Darby though. Story 60. I was due on NOV 10, the birthday of the U.S. Marine Corps. My dad, a former Marine, wanted to name me Chesty, after the bulldog mascot of the Corps. Fortunately not only was I 2 weeks late, but my mom convinced him that that was a terrible name, especially since I'm a female who ended up with a rather large natural bust. Teenagehood would have been brutal. Story 61. Many years ago, I used to address envelopes from a company I worked for, and there were a lot of strange names of people requesting information. The one I never forgot, Tawana Love. Story 62. A long ago boyfriend once told me that he would be naming our first boy Poseidon. I knew in that moment that we would not be working out as a couple. Years later he named his firstborn Poseidon. Poor thing. Story 63. A teenage patient wanted to name her child Jellybean, like jellybean jelly for short. After much discussion and advice from her nurses and social workers, she finally agreed not to use the name. Unfortunately, the next day, she settled on Jelly-Ann, which honestly might be worse. Story 64. In NZ, when a birth is registered through births, deaths and marriages, they decline names that could cause offense to a reasonable person, are an official title or rank etc., making parents choose another name. Every year for funsies they release the recently banned names. Keep in mind these are actual names parents have tried. Some of the ones banned are Justice, Royal T, Sir, 89, V8, Lucifer, Special Constable, Allah, Avia Royal, Heaven Princess Star. Story 65. As a kid I wanted to name my sister Johnny Bravo. I was 6 and upset I didn't get a brother, and the nurse gazed down at me with the most gentle face and told me that when I got a brother I could name him that. But my sister needed a girl name. My mom wound up naming her. Story 66. Not a nurse midwife, but after I gave birth to my son he was in NICU and the baby boy next to my son was Mert. Even the nurses were stumped on that one. Story 67. My friend is pregnant and talking about naming her son Arian, maybe spelled Arian. She's Mexican and says it sounds better in Spanish, but I keep trying to explain that not everyone is going to pronounce it with the accent like she wants. It just seems like it's a name linked to such a negative group that you can't unlink it from them. Story 68. While we're here, us French people have ever wondered why is even a name? Why, my official first name was almost Boy, but my parents were talked out of it. My first name is not much better. It's Bob, not Robert, but just Bob. Story 69. My sister was named Jennifer, after Genesee beer. My brother was almost Steigmeyer, a local brewery. They didn't have a name for me and I was born right after Christmas, so I was almost Noel. The nurse would let them leave the hospital until I had a name. Story 70. My name is Shand, which I found out a few years ago is the German word for scandal, or shame. After telling my parents about it, they admitted they had no idea it was a word and they honestly thought they came up with it themselves. Thankfully I have a second name I've been using since. Story 71. I work with pediatric patients and took care of a toddler named Lil Ricky a few weeks back. I wish his parents had thought long and hard about the social stigma the child will face before they chose such a name. Story 72. Not a nurse, but I knew an old man named Warren Peace and a Pete Moss. I'm sure they both wish a midwife had stepped in. They also knew someone who had a baby that was an accident, so they named him Fluke. Story 73. I wanted to name my daughter Valentine if she had been a boy. Everyone hated it. My favorite movie growing up was Tremors with Kevin Bacon as Valentine McKee, and I always thought it was a cool name. Val for short sounded like a tough guy, and Valentine to me seemed kinda sexy for a guy. Ladies' man and tough guy all rolled into one package. Maybe it's just me wearing rose-colored glasses when remembering the classic sci-fi movies I love. I'm probably the only one who likes it. Story 74. A friend's sister gave one of her kids a real try-hard of a name, so the child's uncle and grandmother put money in a trust that was available to the child at age 16 on the condition that they change their name. Story 75. My mom wanted to name me Josiah. My dad wanted to name me Joel. My dad won, so I go by Joe or lately Joseph, because apparently etymology-wise Joseph and my last name sound right, but Joel and my last name doesn't sound right. Story 76 I wanted to name my son Micah. I think it's a nice name but got talked out of it because anything that would be for him would be for Micah for Micah, sigh. Story 77 I hate that I can't remember the name but my father had to be told the name he wanted for my sibling was illegal. It obviously wasn't, so the poor kid didn't have to grow up with a name. If I did talk to my father's family one last time I would ask what was the name again. I couldn't even laugh at it, it was so bad. Story 78 Oh, another one I just remembered. Not a doctor, but in high school a couple had a baby girl and named her Copenhagen. Like the Dipkin Copenhagen. Yes, I grew up in the south. Story 79 neither, but our local newspaper has a place where they announce births. The same week my daughter was born came Quiche which is pronounced in French like quiche l'ananas, literally pineapple quiche. Story 80 Not a nurse but was in the hospital for something baby-related. Nurse was telling us that the previous birth she attended the mom named the daughter Clee, pronounced Kaylee. When they asked how to spell the name, mom just pointed at the diaper bag, where the name had been misspelled. Apparently everything had been personalized with the misspelling, and she didn't want to redo the bags and stuff. Story 81 I wanted to name our second daughter Evelyn, because in Greek I'm 100 Greek born in America it basically means angel. Our oldest daughter is named Angelina, and I thought it would be hilarious if they both had names that meant the same thing. I still think it would have been hilarious. Unfortunately I don't live in a democracy, or even a kierocracy, and my wife said no to that. Story 82 My parents almost named me Madison. Not a horrible name but they ended up not going with that because my grandfather had a crazy Aunt Maddie. They ended up naming me Allison, which I love because it's not overly common but yet easy to pronounce and stuff. It turned out great because the name Madison is pretty common where I live and I like being a little bit unique. Story 83 Not a nurse but once heard a person talking about naming their future child Snivellis. They never read or watched Harry Potter. When I asked them why they told me well it has a ring to it, you know what I mean, we could call him Snivy for short or something. Story 84 In my country, there's a cultural group called Afrikaans who are mostly white and the tradition is to name your daughter after your mother and a son after your father. Usually it's the dad's parents who get first preference. Anyway my mom skipped out on naming my older sister Martha Wilhelmina, and I most got named that. Story 85 In Frank Zappa's autobiography, he talks about how when his first son was born the hospital staff wouldn't let them name him Dweezil, so they named him Ian Donald Calvin Euclid, but called him Dweezil anyway. Then when Dweezil learned that it wasn't legally his name when he was 5 he insisted on having it legally changed. Story 86 I have a family member that's a midwife. She once was told that if the baby was born a boy, he would be called Paddington Bear. Fortunately they had a girl and called her a normal-sounding flower-related name, think Lily Rose. Story 87 Not a nurse etc. but I worked at a foreign births register at an embassy a decade ago. It was the unique spellings and double-barreled names was made me twitch. Carrie Anderson Con McDonald Steinberg not such a problem for birth certs, but passports have a letter limit so was some odd discussions on what to leave out. It was the start of got hype so few of those popped up. Sansa, Arya, Tyrion, Daenerys, Colossi and one Varys. Kid had such a old fat bald man face. Story 88 Wanted to name the baby Lana. We had the name written in our room, but then caught a glance of in the mirror. Changed our minds pretty quick. My sister was almost Phoebe Monica. You'd be surprised to learn my parents have never watched an episode of Friends. Story 89 My mother was set on calling me Anthony Paul Edwards, until she realized my initials would be AP. She told me that once she realized that, all she could see was the names I'd get called in school and didn't want me to be put through that, so she settled on a name with the initials ACE. I think my life has been a lot better off because of it. LOL. Story 90 Quick word of caution to readers here every time this question comes up. The same tales rooted in racism. My friend has an aunt who had a manager who saw a black woman name her baby Syphilis BC. She thought it sounded pretty, and names that are perfectly reasonable in other cultures come in spades. It's been this way for years, with this mockery disproportionately affecting black folks with either made-up garbage like the example above, or mocking lovely names because they're perceived as ghetto. Please use your better judgment when posting and reading to decide whether a story is true or not. Check this page out for reference. If you're about to post one of the following names, stop. Whoever told it to you is lying, or was lied to.
H le clitoris clatores fémal fuma le gonorrhea gunoréa le mongelo le monguelo no smoking naumo king orangello oranguelo shotaid syphilis syphilis testicle testiclé urine uérienne vagina vageunami modeur gotoct out of naming membrose.
Instead, Might Aunt suggested that I get two names that start with J so that people could call me JJ like that guy from Good Times. Story 91 A nurse actually gave me my middle name. My family is part Chinese and wanted me to have a Chinese middle name. Nobody had one so we asked one of the nurses who was Chinese, so my Chinese name supposedly means happy and healthy. Story 92 Apparently, I was almost named Chevron, yes, after the gas station. The only reason I wasn't is that my parents actually made it to the hospital, and my mom didn't have to give birth to me in a parking lot of a Chevron. Very thankful it worked out the way it did. Story 93 Parent here. When filling out the forms at the hospital, the nurse said, "Are you sure about that?" When we told her we wanted our son's middle name to be Kenobi. Story 94 Obligatory Not a nurse or midwife, but my mom had to forbid my dad from naming my little brother Johnny Walker. It is seriously an old family name. My dad's great uncle was Johnny Walker IV, so my brother would have been Johnny Walker V, and he turned out to be ginger, so he would have been Johnny Walker Red. Story 95 Not a nurse or a midwife, But my mother wanted to name me Cougar. I ended up being a Kyle, both ridiculous names if you ask me. Had I been named Cougar, I'm sure I would have been mercilessly bullied in school. And Kyle I hate because it's the universal white trash boy who drinks Monster energy drinks and punches holes in their wall name. Story 96. I'm neither of those two, but I tried to convince my cousin to not name her daughter Potato Head. I hate myself for even trying, as that would be funny in 10 years. Story 97. My grandpa wanted me to be named Melania. I'm so happy my mom hated that name. She almost named me after Britney Spears, but my dad hated that, so I'm not a Britney or a Melania. Story 98. I work in education and have seen all kinds of interesting names. One that stands out in memory was Jackson. Also the multitudes of spellings on the same sounding name throws me off every time. Kylie, Kaylee, and then the variations of that name Keely, Aiden is another with multiple spellings. Most work, others not so much. Aiden, these are all real. Story 99. I had a student named 3 once, the number, not the word 3, apparently that flies in my state. I thought it was pretty, even though at first I thought it was a mistaken roster. Also there were apparently some twins before my time named Tampaxia and Cotexia. Story 100. I talked myself out of a lot of names. Being of Irish descent, I loved the idea of giving my child an Irish name. There were several I liked, but I had to be honest with myself. I didn't want him to struggle with name. I didn't want him to have to correct or help people with his name, nor did I want him to be bullied because of his name. Not to mention his mother is Hispanic, so fair-skinned finger with a dark-skinned Hispanic. Yeah, he's taking most of her traits. One name that I loved was Tig, which is pronounced Ty-G, but reason one. So I compromised on a bit more common name that was easier to pronounce. Then 10 months ago little Nolan was born. Story 101. A court ruled against parents in Canada to force them to rename their kid. Parents wanted to name him Spatula, like the kitchen tool, linked to French Canada article. Story 102. I know a girl named Army. Her mother is a very country with a thick accent, and it was supposed to be Arima Arima. The nurse just wrote down what she heard. Nobody caught it until it was too late. It was already registered. My wife's first husband wanted to name their first son BJ, not BJ. But plain BJ, it didn't stand for anything, which is a question he has gotten a lot over the years. She put her foot down and told him no. When she was pregnant, with their second son, he wanted to name that boy BJ. Again she said no. So he went out and found a woman that was willing to let him get her pregnant, and named the boy BJ. So he left my wife for that person. I am glad he did, but I feel so sorry for the boy. He has lived his entire life being called to his face by friends, and people that didn't know him doesn't like him, which because of his name has developed a really bad attitude, and very few people like him, except his drug buddies. He's been in so many fights because someone called him, poor kid. He's over 30 now and it still happens. Shirtanya, Tequila, Almalov, yep, seriously.